Hey Nathan.
All right, Johnny, how you doing?
Oh, splendid. Very good. And the sunshine's coming in through the window at the minute and I'm loving it.
What more
Summer
can
is
you ask for?
summer is definitely on the way. I'm
Glorious.
yeah, well, how's the weather up north? Is it just permanent overcast or has the sun decided to show itself?
I don't know you dare. Up north is just permanent. It's just glory all year round. When it rains, liquid sunshine.
Liquid sunshine. Yeah, it's like that famous saying, isn't it? I always prefer the summer, the rain is warmer. Um 100%. So, today's subject, I've already given a hint about it in the pre-show introduction, but Nathan, I'll let you take it away because this was your idea. What is today's topic?
Well, just to date this podcast, in light of the recent weeks and particularly on the weekend just gone, where we saw the royal funeral, um, uh, and I was just struck by the sadness that I saw on not just the Queen, but on all the royal family who were there. There's face, and as you're looking to discuss subjects that aren't always covered in normal life, and we're just expected to know how to crack on and deal with things. I just thought it'd be good if we spent a bit of time talking about grief and bereavement, and how we cope with it personally, but then also how we can cope with it as um, by being to positively input into our family or into our friends who may be bereaving or grieving, sorry, and especially like also not just that, but in this last year, thanks to the vid,
Hmm.
lots of people are grieving and bereaving, and not just grieving. Um, like the loss of family members, although that's probably the biggest thing, but maybe grieving the loss of employment or other the loss of daily friendship contacts and all that kind of thing. And so there's different ways that we can experience grief and bereavement, but no one really talks about it till after the event. And so I quite like just to have something out there that maybe if you listen to it in and then it happens, you may have been pre-warned. Oh, it maybe it's just one of those things that it happens to you, and then you find this podcast afterwards, and we're always playing catch up. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that was what I was thinking.
Yeah. I really like that you have come up with this topic because um it was actually a topic that I I already recorded an episode on this topic, believe it or not, in the like early days of this podcast, and
Mm.
then prior to launch I was like, the quality's just not good even for a brand new podcaster. It was terrible. So um part of that learning process was I'll do this episode again, and I do intend to cover this subject maybe perhaps in the next series or the series after that with a particular guest in mind.
Oh,
But
good. Get a professional after us to cowboy our way through it.
oh
It's
yeah,
definitely
100, yeah, we're just gonna destroy this subject. Absolutely no professional guidance at all on how to deal with bereavement, just our own strange experiences. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, but that's going to be good enough for me in this, and hopefully it'll be good enough for you, the audience, at least for now. So yeah, it's an interesting one because I've been very fortunate, if that's a weird way to say it, that I was well into adulthood um, before I experienced my first serious loss of family in the form of my granddad a couple of years ago.
Mm,
And it was very sudden and um, quite frankly didn't know how to deal with it
mm,
because, we expected him to be around for at least another 10 years. And he unfortunately passed away or in the early hours of the morning of like a massive heart attack. um my only consolation was that he wasn't awake for very long. Like he knew
yeah.
something wasn't quite right, but based on what I've heard, he hit the deck and that was him. He was gone.
Mm,
um and it was rare. What hurt on top of most of it was the fact that I did get to spend some time with him the weekend before he died,
mm,
and he looked fine. Like he was great. There was no inkling that. what was going to happen a week from then. And it was quite nice because we ended up having an impromptu bonding session. So my mother asked me to build my grandparents' new bird feeder. So I started building it, and then he just happened to come out, and we built a bird feeder together. And that was the
Oh
last
man,
activity we ever done together. Which
that's so good.
oh yeah, 100%. And at the time I thought, it was a nice little activity, but I didn't think much of it. And then we went inside, spent another 5 minutes with him, and I'll never forget it. I gave him a hug and I said, "I'll see you next week, Granddad." And he was
Mm,
like, "Yeah, I no worries, son." And off I went. And then transpired that actually I couldn't do that weekend because work related stuff happened, and basically I had to work that weekend,
mm,
which wasn't ideal, but I thought it's no dramas, I'll be home the following weekend. And I was working on the Sunday, woke up the Monday morning to several missed calls, and uh pardon me, I thought, okay, this is a bit strange. Got a call, or I answered the call, and yeah, my dad told me that my granddad had passed away that
wow.
morning.
Okay.
And because that's the first time I ever experienced
Mm,
death so close to hand with a loved one,
mm,
I do remember I was silent on the phone for about 5 seconds, trying to think of a response, and literally the only response I could come up with was right, okay.
yeah, yeah.
um and yourself, your thoughts are going a million miles an hour. And thankfully I was in a position that I could quickly finish what I needed to do for work related activities, and I
Mm,
could instantly get a flight home from Scotland. But the moment I hung that phone up and had my morning shower and shave and got dressed and ready for work, it was like, it was such a surreal
mm,
and strange experience, knowing that this figure that I'd had in my life for 26 years was gone in an instant,
yeah,
like
yeah.
literally,
Mm,
and yeah, I mean, I wish I could communicate effectively how much it hurt and how much of a shock it was. Like I would say I'm a pretty emotionally stable, emotionally clear-headed bloke,
mm,
but like it was weird how I had waves of calm and then waves of emotional overwhelm, and it's
mm,
very strange. Like I think, especially for blokes, we will bottle things up, and we're not very good at dealing with that emotional side of things. I think funerals and other such things of that nature, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, when your favorite team wins at a sporting event or the World Cup, there's that two extremes of emotion that is almost, from a societal point of view, the only times we as blokes can express emotion of extreme joy or extreme pain. And it's just, it was very, very strange that, I had, for 26 years, obviously I was not immune to, I knew that people died, but when it
mm,
hits so close to home,
yeah, yeah.
with and in a weird way, that nothing is permanent,
Mm,
that people will eventually die, but it's kind of like, yeah, it's in the back of your mind, but I won't have to deal with that for a while, and then it happens, the inevitable happens,
mm,
and you still can't deal with it. You're like, what? I don't know what to do. So lucky enough I got home, and this is the bit where I think is really important to discuss, and that I had no idea what happened for a funeral at all.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I didn't know that, my granddad had been taken away so soon, like literally a few hours after his death. Had no idea that the funeral people, the I don't know if I'm saying it right, the funeral parlor, or what is
Hmm,
it called?
yeah,
Yeah, that is the correct term.
yeah.
Uh,
Undertakers to the funeral.
Undertakers, yes, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. The undertakers were already in our house. Like my granddad, I think, passed away at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and by 9 o'clock, the undertakers were there. No idea. Maybe that's just a really efficient, good service. I don't know, but undertakers were there. Then, um, throughout the week, something which really, really caught me off guard was, and I don't know if this is perhaps just a Northern Irish thing or an Irish thing, but like we had an open casket So like
Right. Okay.
I seen my granddad the day after he died, and like that, I don't know if you've ever had the feeling of someone punching you in the stomach and pulling it
Mm,
out,
mm.
but like that took the wind out of me, like that was the
Gosh.
first time I'd, obviously seen a dead body, and obviously of
Yeah.
someone so close.
Mm,
And I think what made it just as hard was obviously seeing my granny being very upset and family being upset. But again, what do you do apart from give a hug? And what you can't say it's okay, because it's clearly not. Um, and it's this emotional roller coaster. But then as a bloke, you feel like you need to do something. You need
mm,
to not fix it necessarily, but you need to provide some sort of
yeah. Yeah.
value
Yeah.
in this situation. You just
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
sit there and you know cry and do things. You need to like be doing something productive in some capacity.
Mm,
And then obviously the funeral happened on the Friday,
mm,
and yeah, it was very very strange actually seeing, and I don't know why it was strange for me because I'd seen it weirdly enough. You see it in the movies all the time, but like the where the pastor, or it was the undertaker in our case, had poured the ashes into the grave, like ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I'm not sure what the religious significance of that is, but um, but it's kind of like, yeah, that seeing that again in real life, I'm like, nobody has prepared me for this. I've literally no idea what's going
yeah.
on.
Totally. Yeah.
And then afterwards, there's obviously you do get over it eventually, but it was like, I don't remember that week, in all
Mm,
honesty. I don't know, like, if that's normal, but I don't, from finding out my granddad had passed to, burying him in a couple of days after, I'm kind of like, I can barely remember generally what those days consisted of. Like, there's the occasional conversation I can remember, and pardon me, things like that, but it's just all a blur. But then that, like, I was thrown into the deep end with, the loss of a loved one. And this is something that I think that if I was at school, or even university, or even, I don't even know if this would be appropriate, but even in your workplace, setting
mm,
aside once a week, once a year, to maybe talk about this kind of thing, so you don't get caught out by
mm.
this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because you know obviously everyone's different,
Mm,
and
totally.
it's just so, it's just caught me so unprepared that a lot of the times I was wondering, am I doing the right thing? Is this too much? Is this too little?
Mm,
Um, and generally just feeling out of place. Do you know what I mean?
mm.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's my experience with it. What would yours be?
Yeah, I think very similar in the fact that I certainly remember as a kid. I remember like um, my mum or mum and dad together um, of an afternoon going to a funeral of someone, and like, oh, where are you going? Oh, we're going to like Mr. So and so's funeral or Mrs. So and so's funeral. And it was usually like an elderly member of the church that I grew up going to, or or another person somewhere, like, and they hadn't necessarily been invited, but just going to pay respects. It was someone up the road, and so being aware of the fact that people did die, obviously.
Yeah,
But then, like, and I think there've been a couple of sort of, like great aunts or wherever who had passed away, but like these people were just like names that were mentioned occasionally, and so I didn't really know who they were. There was no personal impact, if you like, on me for these people. But then, like you were saying, in your, I think I was in my early 20s or something when my grandma passed away. Um, and I think like from what you said as well, that same thing of that, you know, absolutely no real idea of how to react or respond, because there's you could be the president of America, or I don't know, Jeff Bezos or wherever, CEO of a massive company. You can't stop people dying.
yeah,
You can't do anything about that. And so, how do you respond? What do you do? And I think, like you, I think I just sort of went, "Oh, okay," it, because I didn't know how else to react. And I suppose, like for us, for me personally, in our family, I think there'd been a bit more warning. because my grandma she'd had a couple of falls, and she'd broken a hip and various other things. And from at the age she was, and with those things, you can, if I was to speak, without emotion or whatever, you can mark the time out in days from that happening. It's almost, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And I remember a few months before that happening, and my grandma having a bit of a funny turn and ending up in hospital. And for some reason, I'd gone to see my grandma the day that happened, so I was in the ambulance going round to the hospital. And when we got there was a couple of my aunties were there or turned up shortly after. And one of them confronting this young doctor to ask, not in a, but like, what's wrong with her?
Mm.
And the doctor just said, she's old. She's been alive for ages. There's nothing, and he wasn't without compassion or without sympathy, but he was just very honest. He's like, there is no pill that cures being old.
Yeah.
And I remember at that point, because I'm not going to lie, despite the fact I'd done like first aid training and all this kind of stuff, and how to deal with people who are injured and wounded and stuff, when I was at my grandma's flat and she started having this funny turn and pressed a panic button, I also panicked. And I was like, I do not know what to do, because it's like, if it was a colleague who'd fallen over, I'd be all over it. But this is my grandma. And all of a sudden my world was spinning out. And so almost kind of, like, but hearing that doctor just saying, there's nothing we can do, it's just part of being alive, is getting old. And so I think, like, I was kind of mentally prepared for this inevitability, if you like, but it still felt weird and didn't feel right. And I didn't know how to articulate how I was feeling. And I seem to remember that after being told what happened, I just went and sat down in Victoria Park in Portsmouth. Just went and sat down on a bench just on my own, even though, because it was like springtime, I think, and the park was busy, I just went and sat on a bench and essentially was on my own in a little mental bubble that I put around myself, and sat for a few minutes and just thought about what, how I felt, and also just sort of, like I say, just realizing that it is horrible because there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Now, so I don't know, for me, it was that was my first, like, in fact, no, there'd been a significant bereavement. But then there's been subsequent ones, like where I had an uncle who passed away, and he was not old in relative terms, and just absolutely putting my foot in it with my auntie, when, like, a couple of months after, my family, well, one bit of my family are big Huddersfield Town fans, and Town had got into the playoffs, which meant they were going to Wembley, and I knew that my uncle and two cousins were season ticket holders. And without even thinking, because I don't know, speaking for myself, I'm dumb, and I just said to my auntie, "Oh, will they," and named them, "will they be going to the match?" And it wasn't until the words had tripped off my mouth when I was like, "No, of course my uncle won't be going to the match because he's not here anymore."
Yeah.
But it was just such a natural question to ask. And my auntie said, "Well, I'm sure he'll be there in spirit." And I was like, "Oh, and you can't unsay something. You can't, you just want to go and lay down in front of traffic. Can't believe I just said that. And because, like you were saying, we, in our head, even though rationally we know people aren't here forever, emotionally we treat people like they are here forever. And it's like, I don't think there is a way of marrying the rational and emotional bit together, because they are just like, they bounce off one another instead, don't they? And but I just think in that moment of time, like, when you're saying, and it is, and again, we can only speak from the viewpoint of a man. So if we have any female listeners out there who can correct us and tell us how, as a as a woman, you respond to grief and bereavement. But like you were saying, that desire to just be useful. I need to do something. Yeah, I need to do something. It's like, does anybody want tea? We've had 96 cups of tea. Put the kettle back down. But wherever it is, you feel this overwhelming need to be useful. But like, what can you do? And yeah, I remember my grandma, after my grandma's funeral, being confronted by one of my cousins because I hadn't cried during the service, and I was like, well, I didn't feel the need to, and it wasn't because I lacked emotion or whatever. It was just like, I don't know. I'd come to a point where I was already at peace with what had happened.
Yeah.
And so although there was still moments and times, and there are times now afterwards, because moving back up north, and I'm very near to where my grandma lived before she passed away, and so I walk past it, and there isn't a single time when I walk past it where I don't think of my grandma.
Yeah.
But every time I do, I think of my grandma and I smile, because every thought about my grandma is a happy one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there's no sense of kind of like, injustice, or it's unfair. I mean, she was 97.
Good age.
Do you know what I mean? Like, she'd done all right, and she'd seen kids, grandkids, and great grandkids born and grow up and all that kind of stuff, So, her impact on our family was great, and everybody loved her. And so, in terms of that kind of thing, I think for me, one of the weirdest ones in terms of a funeral and not knowing at all how to react was when a very close friend of mine, which is really weird. Well, you will know the nature of our job.
Mm-hmm.
You can be very close friends with someone and not know anything about their life outside of that
100%,
job.
Yeah.
Okay. Or no, very small snippets. And this particular guy, his grandma passed away, and he'd never been to a funeral. He'd never done any of these things. And so he asked me, would I go to the funeral with him?
All right.
Like, just to be his mate. And I turned up at this thing, and this is a big Liverpool family, a huge Scouse family.
Yeah.
And I turned up at this funeral, and I was like, I don't know anybody here. This is, it was such a surreal experience.
Yeah.
And I just sat, and my mate kind of fell apart, and he was, unashamed. And this guy's a manly man, unashamedly was crying, and that's absolutely rightly so. It's his grandma, and all the other members of his family are there, all being sad and all this kind of thing. And I just remember just sitting there. I had no emotional attachment to this at all. And it was just the weirdest thing. And so not that I faked emotion, because obviously I was sad for my friend.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sad, if you know what I mean, because I never knew this person. And that was a really surreal experience. And I just had to, but in terms of compassion and being caring to this friend, and also to his family, I was just there, and I just tried to be a good friend. But again, like, no one, there's no kind of book on how to behave when a close friend has a bereavement either, is there?
No.
And I suppose, like, I think in those times that's where we kind of, and that did kind of come home to me on the weekend with that, with the funeral, and for Prince Philip, and all, people's reactions and stuff. And there was all the kind of, it was quite funny seeing all the anger and vitriol on social media that the BBC suspended all of its programming for this kind of thing about the passing away of Prince Philip on the day it happened. And in fact, actually on the Sunday, I joked with my mum, because on a Sunday, my mum likes to watch Songs of Praise. And I said, what's better than the BBC? They've got like a, in case of emergency, smash glass, and pull out the pre-recorded Prince Philip has passed away Songs of Praise DVD. And as the program started on the Sunday, it was like, in a change from our scheduled programming, here's a Songs of Praise dedicated to Prince Philip. And I was like, you're going to be kidding me. I was joking, but it felt like they'd got, that they'd prepared for this, and they had all these interviews. I was like, there's no way you've interviewed these people since yesterday. This literally happened yesterday. There's no way. But, so they must have already, like, just in case it happens in the next 12 months, let's have a chat about your experiences with Prince Philip.
Yeah.
With archbishops and whatever. And so, but there, there's no, like, how am I supposed to feel about this person? Like, I met him once in, in the course of our duties, our jobs, but you know, I'm sad for his family, and but again, I don't really know them. Um, you know, it's a kind of a strange one. How do we feel? How do we react? Um, because it's kind of like, well, okay, I have empathy because I know how I felt when my grandma passed away, but I think, and there are, and in all these things, whether it's in family or or in friendship circles or whatever, there'll always be those people who tend towards over dramatics, and
Yeah.
will, with the woe is me, or you're not grieving hard enough, or whatever. I don't know, who want to be seen to be mourning the most, um, you know, which is a bizarre idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, we had those at my granddad's funeral. Thankfully, it was just two people, but and they were very quickly told to wind their neck in. But yeah, it was funny. It's so strange you mentioned that. I'm glad we're not the only family that had that.
Yeah, and but I think, like, for me, I think, like, I certainly think that, like, when I was thinking about it, like, my grandma, she grew up, through World War II, and all that kind of stuff, and was married not long after it, or maybe even during it. I can't remember. But
Hmm.
anyway, but like, but she, and I know that, like, one of her brothers, um, had served in the Royal Navy. And
Hmm.
so when I went off and joined, she was supremely proud of the fact that I'd followed in her brother's footsteps, if you like. And so I think, like, for me, and this is not like a weird call to wherever, but I think my grandma would have been happy knowing that I just cracked on, that I was doing my job and I was doing what was required of me,
Yeah.
and still fulfilling my duties, and doing my job, and not, there's always a time to sit down, but then and reflect, and to mourn, and all that kind of thing. And I think finding that balance of doing those two things, because if you just sort of, you know come to a stop and sit and whine and moan or whatever, I don't think that's healthy. But then
No.
I also don't think ignoring it for the sake of, like, this is not but for that sake of that stoic, look at me, man. I also
Yeah.
don't think that's healthy either.
No, 100% it's
Um,
not.
but I think you can still grieve and still, spend some time thinking about it. But then, like I said earlier on, whenever, even now, as we're having this conversation, and I'm using the passing of my grandma as an example, all that's happening in my mind is just regurgitating great thought, memories of her.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was a couple of years before that, when she was 95, maybe. I think, mum and dad had a party in the back garden for something else, and they'd hired a bouncy castle, and we have pictures of, my 95-year-old grandma having the time of her life on a bouncy castle, and just like that immediate response, like you just laughed there. That's how I think, and I'm like, that's way cooler. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? To have that memory, and to laugh, and to think that, she, at 95, she's prepared to take her shoes and socks off and climb on a bouncy castle to bounce with some of her grandkids.
Yeah.
Brilliant, you know.
Yeah, it's so strange you mentioned that, and that every time I think of my granddad, I always think of the times that, yeah, I think he would have been in his 50s or 60s, and in a particular place he used to live, there was this humongous Concord sycamore. Is it sycamore tree of the Conkers? Am I got the right species of tree? I don't
Let's say
know.
yes.
Just say yes. I'm definitely not. That's not an area of expertise, I'm afraid. And I must have been about 7, and my brother must have been about 5, and we loved getting conkers, and you playing what was it, Conquer Wars or something in the playground, and we'd attempt to throw a stick up into the tree to knock these conkers down, not very unsuccessfully. But then Grandad, as usual, coming to the rescue, would fling this stick up into the trees and bring down loads of conkers. Like, more, Granda, more. And you can see him hands on hips and bending down and putting his hands on his knees and breathing like, good grief, kids, how many more conkers do you want? But he dutifully carried on. And fair enough, we had enough conkers for days, and it was great fun spending time with him. And, the rough and tumble play as well that boys like as well. And I always remember my granddad chasing me throughout the house as well, and just having
Mm.
that fun time with them is that's the memories I instantly go back to as well.
Yeah, totally.
Playing chases with your grandparents, or any, or cooking even a good meal, you know what I mean.
Mm.
And it is nice that once the immediate shock wears away, that seems to be the only thing that's left behind, the good memories and the
Yeah, yeah.
positive impact that was left behind. But I think something that's worth discussing is, how do you deal with grief? Because the whole point of this podcast and this
Mm.
episode in
Yeah, yeah.
particular is discussing the things we were never taught that we should have been.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And
Yeah. Well done for
uh,
bringing us back on subject.
yeah. Well, no, I do feel like that there's the risk of rationalizing this too much. I
Mm.
think that it's not comfortable in a way to delve into the emotion, to delve into old wounds. It'd
Mm.
have been very easy to rationalize this subject and go, this is step one, step two, step three. But I feel like it's important to, you know, especially for the audience as well and for ourselves to revisit those old
Mm.
memories and wounds and things like that, rather than take it from a purely logical approach. So I know I did appreciate you sharing your story, and it's always good for me to, pardon me, chat about my experience as well.
Mm. Yeah.
But the question, I suppose, is, how do you deal with grief? And from my own perspective, I don't think there's a correct answer
No,
personally.
I think you're right.
For me, a really good quote I heard shortly after my granddad's passing was that, if an analogy would be that, if you can imagine you're in the sea, and the initial shock of your relative or loved one passing is like a tsunami. It's this huge wave that comes over and completely engulfs you, and there's
Mm.
nothing you can do about it. And then you bob your head to the surface, and there's another huge wave. But then over time, the waves get smaller and smaller and smaller. So, by the end of it, you'll be swimming, you'll be treading water in the sea, and every so often a little weird wave comes along, you bob up, and like, oh, there's that memory, or there's that triggered memory walking past your grandma's old house,
Mm.
or this was their favorite meal, or it's their birthday if they were alive today. Um, so that for me, I don't know why that helped me personally. I honestly don't know. It's just the thought
Mm.
of knowing that, yes, initially it's pretty shocking. This
Mm.
is overwhelming, but then as time goes on, you're not the waves will keep coming, but they'll get
Mm.
less frequent and less
Yeah, yeah.
less steep. And again, I don't think there is a correct way to grieve from the moment of knowing to,
Mm.
however long it may be, to you come to peace with that. I mean, like,
Yeah.
again, we thankfully didn't have anyone saying you're not grieving properly at our granddad's funeral. I mean, I definitely cried a couple of times through the week with it, but for the most part, it was just this weird numbing sensation, especially, um for me, as strange as this sounds, I was glad I was able to, like, sit with my granddad for at least
Mm.
4 or 5 days,
Mm.
so there would be times where I would just be sat with him in the room where he was, and then sometimes both my brothers would be in there as well, and all three of us would just sit there in silence. And even though it was pretty morbid, we were all sort of occasionally breaking the silence with, "Do you remember that time he did this?" or "Do you remember that time we did that?" And it was like,
Mm.
laughing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I liked what you said about, more than likely, if our relatives could speak, they would say, don't worry about me, just crack on. And I know for a fact my granddad would have done that. He'd be
Mm.
like, he'd be waving the hand as he did, and then, don't worry about it, crack on, don't you worry about me, son. And I'm like, but it's hard not to, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, how do you personally deal with grief? Or
Yeah, I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there for me as well. I think it's that kind of because there is that that initial like just cold shock of this person has passed away, because it's even not just like with like family members, but like people who are just, I suppose actually, do you know what, because there's more to biology, there's more to family than biology, isn't there?
yeah,
So you can have like friends of the family who are as much family, you know and in subsequent years, people like that who've passed away, people who were like cornerstones, if you like, in your life, who played big parts in your influencing you and teaching you as you've grown up, and and as those people have passed away as well, and like, whoa, I didn't, and like you're saying, sometimes it's like, I suppose, like with my grandma, it was expected, it was just a matter of time, it was still really sad, but then there would be people like with your granddad, where it's just completely, where did that come from, out of the blue, and it is that cold shock at first, isn't it? And I think in that moment, like, I don't know if there's any right way, or even, I suppose a wrong way would be punching someone. Um, you know, um, but like I say, I in that, my response to that cold shock, like I said, was just to go and sit down and just try and process the information I'd just been given. Um, and and then I think then the next thing I then went and did was, I went and, I think I was, because I was in Portsmouth, so never too far away from friends being around, and I think I just went and probably just went and had a coffee with someone, you
yeah.
know. But um, I um, I I would say that, like, I always worry when people say that they're doing something for a relative who's passed away. I'm doing this in the name of, I'm doing this for them to make them proud of me or whatever. Because I think, like, I don't know, I feel like you should do something for yourself, knowing that this person would be proud of you, not necessarily do it for them. I find that an odd thing,
That's a
especially when
really interesting concept, definitely.
because I don't know. This is going to sound really bizarre, because I've already laid out to the listeners that I'm a paid up card carrying Christian. But I think that when someone's died, I don't think they can hear what's going on in your life anymore, um, or directly influence what's going on in your life anymore.
Yeah.
Um, I won't go into my theological reasonings for that, unless because someone wants me to. But right here, right now, I won't do that. Um, but and so, like, I didn't go and, I went and cracked on with my duties, with my job, with everything else, because it was the right thing to do. But also knowing that that's what I was doing before, and that's, my grandma knew I was in that job, and that's what I was doing, and so doing my duty was just what I should be doing. Um, and so I don't think that, I didn't continue to do this because, I will make grandma proud of me. She was already proud of me.
Yeah.
you know, and so I didn't need to improve on that, if you know what I mean. And so I think that when it comes to reacting, I think how you initially react to that cold shock, I think that's important. And I think in that moment, if you're with your family or wherever, and they're telling you, a family member, then just, I think, there's a quote in the Bible that says, "Weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn." So if someone's more, then just sit and empathize. I think that's what it's saying. Just share empathy with that person.
Mm.
But then I think, then more importantly, then I think, then the going on after that, I think, like what you were saying, is that shared memory, that family memory. You were saying, like, there's nothing wrong with, as you're remembering someone, sitting in silence, but then also that kind of bit where you'd have a memory, you and your brothers, of something that happened with your granddad, which is like, for everyone else, that's just a very inside joke. It's a very personal moment, and maybe to someone on the outside looking in, it might seem really irreverent. These three young men laughing, at the side of their granddad's coffin, but actually, it's totally not. It's totally not irreverent. In many respects, I would say that is reverent,
Yeah.
because what you're doing, you're sharing a moment that the four of you were privy to.
100%.
you
Yeah.
know and okay, there's only three of you left to laugh about it, but all four of you were privy to that moment. And
Oh,
so
100%.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, and I think, I think dealing with your grief through tears, through laughter, and also through rational thinking, I think all of those will help. you know you can't replace that person. That person is 100% irreplaceable. But what you can do is, you can sort of, it's not filling the void, it's kind of, I don't know, it's a nice portrait up of where that person used to be, so you can look at that, the portrait of memories, and remember them well. I think that's important. And I think, yeah, that's how I dealt with it. I just, I you know I would say, even, because, in subsequent years, because we have a big family gathering, like every family does at Christmas or Boxing Day is. But, and what's really great is that, even though we're all now older, all of us, even the youngest of the grandkids are now older, all of voting age, we still play the same stupid games that we played as a family when we were kids, because they were the games that grandma liked playing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so there's a certain sort of thing about it that's just kind of, it almost feels like we're doing it to remember grandma. Really, we're still gathering, because, you know, um, and so I think that's part of the ongoing, because I don't think you ever really you're never going to stop remembering that person, so you're never going to stop grieving.
Yeah.
But it's
Very well
kind of,
said.
but I think that, but I think there are, and I think it affects you differently. So, like, for me, as a grandchild, for us as grandchildren, the way we would grieve, it, as in different to how my mum grieved with her mum passing away, you
Hmm.
know, or how a husband or wife would grieve if husband or wife passes away. It's again, it's completely different, isn't it? Or even, dare I say it, as a parent, if a child was to pass away,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think, like, both of us are looking at it from a viewpoint of a grandchild seeing a grandparent pass away. But there are so many different types of that,
Yeah.
you know. And so, again, I think, and also then different people within that. So I think, like, for me, I would say, if you, not to not to drag people into a pit of your creating, but don't grieve alone.
Yeah.
you know Talk to someone. A friend of mine through church, um someone I know, her husband passed away of a, as far as I'm aware, unrelated COVID thing, but passed away in this last 12 months.
Hmm.
And quite regularly see her out walking in one of the local parks with people who are the same age as her. She's someone I know through church. And she's out walking, and they're talking and stuff like that. And I don't know what all their conversations are about. Sometimes we bump into them and we have a little chat. But I'm assuming at various points her husband's passing will be brought up in the conversation. And I suppose that, you know, going out and having that conversation with someone, um, and doing that, I suppose, I don't know, it's part of that dealing with it, isn't it? Step by step. And sometimes just being able to say your feelings out loud to someone helps, doesn't it? In
Yeah.
that kind of circumstance, rather than, as if you bottle it up, or just have the conversation inside your own head, it's probably not going to be very healthy.
No, no, it won't
Whereas
be.
speaking it out loud, and saying it, and that person will be able to offer you a perspective that will be, outside of your own head as well, which I think will
Yeah,
help.
that's very important. Yeah. Gather your own head in that different perspective. 100%.
Yeah. So I would say, like, and I'm saying this, again, we need to reiterate, that we are not grievance counselors. No,
Yeah.
we're not. We are not even cowboys. I don't know what we would be. We would be the donkey that the cowboys bringing up behind to the rodeo. But but I think but based on our personal experience, I think like you were saying with your brothers sitting and having that conversation, or with cousins, or just with a friend, um, and talking to them about it. Like I think that's really important, and especially if it is a family member, talking to other family members because they're all going to have different memories, and you can kind of enjoy each other's positive memories of that person.
Yeah, 100%. I really like a lot of what you said there, especially about vocalizing it and getting someone else's perspective on the matter, because it is easy to get lost in your own head, especially at an emotionally overwhelming time like that. I think something that is worth chatting about, and you have touched upon it, I think, a little bit in the previous conversation, is that how do we help our friends or even family grieve? Because I know you said, yeah, that you quoted that Bible verse, "Weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn."
Yeah,
Um, but something I would like to chat about is maybe the how do I put it? Maybe perhaps abstract. How do you help in that? In the being that shoulder to cry on, yes, and providing being that outside perspective to someone who's you know perhaps clouded by whose judgment's clouded by emotion, or you know they're not in a good place. But also something I think that's worth chatting about is what
yeah,
can people physically do to help. Now I know that's two sides two sides of the same coin, I suppose. But something I want to touch on is that I think a lot of people turn up to someone's house after someone's passed away and they've no idea what to do. Like, what do you chat about? What do you do? Oh yeah, you accept the 96th cup of tea and you accept your 50th sandwich of scrambled egg and stuff, um, and but then what do you do? Like, for me again, I had no idea. Like, I could only make the tea so many times. I could only help prepare sandwiches so many times. I wanted to feel useful, but I think that there's a lot of unknown etiquette. There's a lot of unknown I don't want to say faux pas, but it's kind of like, again, we've no idea what to. We're already pretty emotionally overwhelmed, and I think that an added stress is, should I be doing something? Is there like an etiquette to this? So I think that's
yeah, yeah.
two subjects worth discussing.
Yeah, I would say like if you're listening to this podcast and you are someone who has been bereaved and you are grieving, and a friend comes to talk to you or to spend time with you, um, be gracious to that friend and accept that they may say something stupid.
Thank you
You
so
know,
much for saying that.
do you know?
That's
Do you
that's
know what I
pretty
mean?
good.
Like if say like if it was we go back a few years and it was we go back to those when my grandma passed away and I turn around to you and say, oh, Johnny, I'm feeling pretty crappy at the minute. I just found out my grandma died, and you know, and you make some kind of joke or something to try and lighten the emotions. You're like, I don't know how to respond to this. Quick, make a joke. And I turn around and respond by punching you. Do you know what I mean? That's not a great response, is it? So and I suppose in the heat of the moment, I don't know how I would respond to that. But I think try and be gracious to the fact that the person doesn't know what to do, because none of us know what to do or what to say. And like I said, like with my auntie, when I asked about my uncle going to the football match,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, what an idiot. Why did I say that? Um, so I think if you're in that kind of, if you're the person who's grieving and someone comes along and their intention is to be kind or whatever to you and to help you, but they say something that's like, why did you say that? They don't know what to do. They're
Yeah.
trying their best, so don't do that. I think if you're on the flip side of that and you're the friend going to someone who is grieving, or you're the family member going to someone who is grieving to support them to wherever, um you know do the you know the you know pause for 2 breaths before you speak.
Yeah, the louder for those at the back.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Just to give that moment for your, you know, don't be don't be afraid to be emotional with that person,
Mm,
and especially if you're a bloke, if you're a man listening to this, you know what, and it's a male friend who's lost someone in their life, give them a hug. Like blooming heck,
preach.
it's got nothing to do with your sexuality or your whatever. Just give that, obviously in post-COVID times at the minute, bump their elbow with as much emotion as you can manage. But just if they need it, give them a flipping hug, man. Don't don't whatever.
Yeah.
Unless of course they don't want, unless of course there's someone who's absolutely, don't touch me. But
Yeah.
like, read the room, what's going on. But try your best to think before you speak. And
100%. Yeah.
I know I said about my faux pas to my auntie, but that was just because for me I associated my uncle with the footy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so it was just a normal thing for me to say. And it wasn't until afterwards I was like, and even now, I mean, we're talking several years afterwards, I'm going, Nathan, why did you say that, man?
Yeah.
Goodness me, But I think so. Like, I think with if you're that friend, go into that person's side who is grieving. Um, just be kind, let them be emotional if they need to be emotional. And if it looks like they're kind of like all like bottled up and being rigid, then let them be that as well. Don't try and tell them how they should feel. Don't try and tell them how they should be responding. Let them get to that point themselves, and be there as they're getting to that point. And I think when it comes to practical things, I don't know, like, I know, for example, like in my church setting, the community. If someone passes away and there's a bereavement in the family, I know that like um, they do things um, like cooking meals for people, so they don't need to worry. So food is
Yeah.
delivered to them, and people take it in turns to do it, and the people dropping the food off will stop and have a little chat or whatever, and it's kind of it's about lifting some of the mundane day-to-day chores off that person so they can deal with the other stuff that's going on. Not everybody's in that kind of community, so I don't know, but I know that's certainly something that we do. um that I suppose it's just kind of ask the person what they want. I suppose that, what can I do to help you out right now? And if their answer is just shove off and leave me alone, then just shove off and leave them alone for a little bit and then come back.
Yeah.
What can I do to help you? And if their answer is, can you go to Asda and pick me up the wherever other supermarkets are available, not a sponsor. Or if there is, can you do this or do that or whatever, then like to the best of your abilities, do that thing that they've asked you to do. I think rather than assuming what someone needs or wants, ask someone what they need or want you to do for them.
Yeah.
And I suppose that would work in any situation, but in that particular one, and if all it is just sit here with me, then just sit there with them.
Yeah.
um, you don't necessarily, not everything has to be, 100-mile-an-hour action. If it gets to like, I don't know, day 50 and you still just sat there with them, maybe think a different path. But just, what can I do to be useful to you right now? I think is a good question, and
I
is an
like
honest
that.
question. And so I think, if we're looking at this thing, and I think also, I think like it's also going back to what you said. I love your catchphrase of messy action, and I
Yeah.
think stepping into someone's grief to be a friend to help them, that is going to be messy and requires action.
Well,
And
yeah. Well said.
so I think not being afraid to say, what can I do to help you. I think that would carry a lot of burden, because they might not want you to do anything, but just the fact that you've asked might help. The,
Yeah.
the fact that you've shown that you actually give a monkeys may be just what they need,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah. That's really good. I mean, I don't know how much more I can add to that. Like my my only experience would be when a very good friend of mine unfortunately lost his granddad too, and um, I gave him a call a couple of days after. Just obviously, I wanted to let him and the family get over the initial shock and do what they needed to do. But I ended up just having a quick 5-10 minute conversation with him. I just felt that a text message simply wouldn't do. I felt like it was deeply uncomfortable for me, and I say this all the time. As blokes dealing with emotions and getting into that really uncomfortable space where we don't know what to say and we feel a bit odd.
Mm.
Whereas, um, the pair of us just had a very frank but very thoughtful conversation, and I could tell by his voice that he really really appreciated it.
Yeah,
And
that's good, man.
yeah, I mean, uh, in a weird way, it's weirdly become a catchphrase, messy action. But I like how you've applied it in the, you know for me, taking messy action and stepping into my family's grief was the first time I seen my granny and my
Mm.
mum after my
Mm.
granddad's passing. And because I arrived at my grandparents' house, and they were still in the living room talking with the undertaker, and me and my brothers went to the kitchen, were chatting away, and then they came out, and it's that the first time seeing relatives after this event, and literally
Wow.
having nothing to say except just giving them a hug. And it's kind of like there's nothing you can say. This is just a terrible situation,
Mm.
and the only thing for it is just a hug. um and then we all promptly did what all good British people do and got a cup of tea. Doesn't matter if the world's falling apart. There's nothing a cup of tea can't solve, or at least temporarily alleviate. um, so
Amen.
amen. And yeah, it's action wise. I mean, for me, my experience of it that week was really that I think you hit the nail on the head. Where could you be useful at that moment? Like, 1 minute you could just be giving someone a hug, the next minute, right, they need someone to get the next batch of sandwiches, or they need someone to, even on the day, can you help drive people about? Can you help, just so
Mm.
obviously in COVID times this is different, but post COVID, the world is going to get back to the point where you can do what we would traditionally have done at a
Mm.
funeral and that. But overall, I think we've pretty much covered everything we can without trying to at least pretend to be experts in this. You know, I think potentially in the next season or couple of seasons time, I might even try and get an Undertaker on and say, like, if you are in this position, what can you expect, or what should you at least know about the process previous, so that you're not on a whim trying
Mm.
to decide, uh, you know, this, that, and the other. And then the cost of a funeral. I didn't realize how much funerals cost.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
not they're not cheap affairs.
yeah. I went to
But
Viking funeral, so
oh, there you go. Begsy firing the fire arrow into your boat.
yes,
Sorted. So I think that's pretty much everything I want to say on the subject.
it's
I
good.
think that we've talked about our personal experiences,
Mm.
and I think to a realistic degree what you can do to help your friends and
Yeah,
family.
yeah, yeah.
I feel like we've also touched on what you should do as an individual, like reaching out
Mm.
for help and
Yeah,
not
yeah,
being afraid to express emotions and things. Is there any
yeah.
final thoughts you want to add to it?
I would just say to our regular listeners and irregular listeners, reach out to Johnny on his social medias and all that, and talk about our collective experiences, what was good, what was bad, because actually I think this is a subject that a wealth of experiences would benefit all of us. Um, you know, and if at the moment you're going through this, um, I'm going to stitch you up a little bit in this, but reach out to it. Reach out to us if we can just be a listening ear. You might be a
100%.
complete stranger to us, but if we could just be a listening ear, I would say that we would be prepared to do that. Um, because I think, for my take on all this, is that the best thing you can do is not try and batten down the hatches and go through this alone. And so, and if you're listening to this in 10 years' time and we're still breathing, reach out to us if we can help you. If we can just listen to you, then that's what, we would be there for you in that. For all you curious Ulster persons out there, then so
that you may have just gotten my name for our little community, Ulster persons.
Ulster persons. So yeah, so Ulsterlings.
Ulsterlings. There you go. That's it. Sorted. Little Ulsterlings. I like it.
So yeah, that's my final thoughts, and I'll shut up.
No. Well, thanks very much, Nathan, for having this chat. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about it. And as always, it's a subject amongst many subjects that isn't discussed, and it really should be. And no doubt we'll either touch on this subject again in the future, or it'll be touched on in passing. But there will be more subjects like this to come, and not on such a morbid tone, listeners, but certainly we're going to try and find subjects that are not discussed as much as they should be. Definitely. And between Nathan's wit and hopefully my dulcet tones, you'll be able to bear and listen to us. But once again, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure as always. Thank you.